Hi, everyone. We want to welcome each of you logging in the middle of your day to talk about public safety. My name is Allie Schneeman, and I'm one of the co-founders of Pacific Northwest Parent Education. We started this nonprofit 6 years ago with a group of unpaid volunteers to utilize generous community donations to provide completely free events that partner with schools in our area. We work with families, teachers, principals, guidance counselors, social workers, mental health providers, social justice experts, all in our area to help understand what topics need more information for these K-8 students, youth, teens, tweens, high schoolers, all of them. As a parent of two middle schoolers here in the Ballard neighborhood, attending their local Seattle public school, there's been a lot of questions lately in the past few weeks about how to make decisions for the safety of our kids and how to equip them with the safety skills they need as well. As a member of our community, I want to share compassion for any families in our that have been victims of any safety or violence issues, whether it's in the past few weeks or really any point in your lives. Before I introduce the speaker, I just want to say thank you to all of our volunteers and all of the school communities that help us get the word out about these types of events. I also want to thank all of our group and individual donors that make these events possible. We spend every single dollar that we get on getting this quality information into everyone's hands for free. And if you're part of any organization at your school or business or a family grant or gifts to help continue to help us provide these free support to parents, and if that sounds like something meaningful, please reach out in the chat to us. A couple of quick housekeeping things before I hand things off is you are in the right spot today for our talk with Christy Keating about public health and safety. Our organization is still in communication with the Seattle Police Department and council members in our area regarding an opportunity for each of them to communicate directly with the public, but that's not going to be addressed on today's call. Please keep an eye out in your chat for how to communicate or ask questions. We're utilizing the Zoom webinar platform, which is a little bit different than a traditional Zoom call. So your best bet to communicate with our team is to put any comments or questions in the Q&A function. This event will be recorded. The link to the event will be sent out afterwards to all of the people who registered for the events. Okay, at last, I want to introduce someone on our team that our team has worked with many times in the past and that I have utmost respect for. Christy Keating of the Heartful Parent Collective is a fellow parent and licensed attorney. She's now a certified parent educator and parent coach. She has spent nearly 20 years as a prosecutor in the King County Prosecutor's Office in Seattle, where she spent the latter part of her career specializing in the prosecution of sexual violent predators. Christy's 20 years of experience focusing on helping parents, kids, and teens be both brain and body safe. Welcome, Christy. I hand it off to you. I will mute myself, but am available in the Q&A. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Allie, and thanks to Pacific Northwest Parent Ed for having me. In a moment, I will share my screen with everyone, but I just wanted to sort of start with, like I said, a thank you for Pacific Northwest Parent Ed, and also a thank you to each of you who are attending this, whether you're attending live today during your lunch hour or, during a quick break in your day, or if you are watching this on replay. I know that there were a large number of people registered, so I'm going to try to make our time as valuable today as possible, and answer as many of your questions as I can at the end. Allie has told you a lot about me. I'll share a little bit more momentarily, but I want to sort of echo something that Allie said and recognize that I know that some of you who are attending today may have been directly involved with some of the incidents that Allie was talking about in the Ballard neighborhood, and may have been victimized by that, may have been sort of close to that, and be dealing with a lot of fear right now. And we are going to talk about that a little bit today, but I also want to recommend for anyone who has been victimized or is dealing with intense levels of fear on behalf of your, either for yourself or for your kids, that you get therapeutic support, especially if you're in the Seattle area. We have wonderful, wonderful resources. Harborview has a fabulous trauma center, and there are, of course, other private therapists that are can be a good support for kiddos and parents who need it. With that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we will get started with talking about youth and public safety today. And I want to start, as Ali said, Ali really told you everything you need to know. I'm not going to read this whole screen to you. I just want to note that I am the founder of the Heartful Parent Collective, which is made up of 5 sort of subparts. Heartful Parent Coaching, where I work one-on-one with parents to support them on their parenting journey. The Heartful Parent Academy, which is an online membership with lots of great pre-recorded information and live access to me. It is one of the only officially licensed products in the United States by the Positive Discipline Association. I also own Savvy Parent Safe Kids, where I talk a lot about safety, like we are today. I run the Safe Parenting Summit every year. That will be the first full week of March in 2024. And if you are looking for sort of weekly parenting information, I have the Heartful Parent podcast, which is available wherever you listen to podcasts. The expertise that I'm bringing into play today really is twofold. It's my work as a parent coach and a positive discipline educator, and it's also my what I call Act 1 of my professional career, which was the nearly 20 years that I spent in the King County Prosecutor's Office. I'm also not going to read this slide, but that just kind of gives you an idea of who I am and what values I hold dear. Obviously, safety is right up there at the top, which is the focus of today, but some other really critical values that we'll be talking about in the course of today's presentation, because they relate so directly to how you need to be interacting with your kiddos as you talk to them about safety. So here's what we're going to try to cover today. And I know that, we don't have oodles and oodles of time, but I really want to provide you some value in the time that we do have together. So I'm going to share with you my exclusive Talk Scared framework. Some of you may have seen this before. It may be new to some of you, but this is something that I created to help parents talk with kids about difficult subjects. We're going to talk about some of the risks and realities of safety. And then I'm going to share with you some information about this phrase, stranger danger. I'm going to share with you some savvy safety strategies that if you have tweens or teens, certainly in the Ballard area, but really anywhere, are really good to be sharing with your kiddos. How to manage your own fears and anxiety, and how to manage the fears and anxieties of your kids around safety and in general. A lot of the information that I'm going to share with you is about that is just as effective if you're dealing with a child who's worried about walking down the street as a child who is stressed out about their, math test next week. All right, so to get started, we're going to talk about the Talk Scared framework. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, this is a framework that I developed sometime during the pandemic. I think it was after the murder of George Floyd. And obviously there was a lot of information in the media at that time about that particular murder, as well as a number of other things happening in the country. And then this was all with the backdrop of the pandemic. And parents were feeling really stressed about how to talk to their kids about big events, big events that happen in our world. And so I created this framework to really give parents a reminder or some steps that they can walk through to have those conversations. And I thought it would be really helpful to go through this today because for 2 reasons. One, for those of you who have been directly affected or, impacted by the events that sort of were the impetus for today, that what's been going on with Ballard with some students being young students being robbed for their cell phones, if you're not familiar with what's been going on. It's certainly helpful for those families in terms of talking to your kids, but also, as the school year gets underway, we know that there are going to be events that happen in our world, over the next year and beyond, that you're going to have to talk to your kids about, because they're going to hear about it, they're going to know about it, they might be involved in it. And so having this in your back pocket can be really helpful. So what does Talk Scared stand for? Well, we're going to go one by one. So the T is pretty obvious. It's talk. It is our job as parents to start the conversation. And I hear a lot of parents say to me in a lot of different contexts around parenting, well, I'm going to wait and see if my child asks me any questions. And if they do, I'll answer them. And the problem with that approach, whether we're talking about puberty, sex, or safety, as we are here, is that oftentimes kids don't ask, right? They don't know what they don't know, or they are fearful for whatever reason to ask, or they think, well, if my parents aren't talking to me about it, that means they don't want to talk about it. Or they think they've got it all figured out. They think they know, right? If you are parenting a tween or a teen right now, as I am, they like to think they know much more than we know they do. And so they may never ask those questions. So it is really imperative that we as parents take it upon ourselves to start the conversation. And this is true for younger children as well, but we can say, hey, have you heard about X, Y, and Z? And if they have, you might have a different conversation than if they haven't. But either way, you'll have information that's important for you to know. I think it's really unfair to put the responsibility on our children to bring difficult conversations up. All right, the A is that we need to ask and encourage questions. So I really believe that in having these difficult conversations, it's always a great place to start with questions. Ask them what they know or what they think they know, what they've heard, what they've seen on the news, what they've seen on social media. Depending on the issue, what have their teachers said to them? What have their peers said to them? What have their older siblings said to them? We want to know what is their starting point so that we can build upon that, confirm information that they have, correct information that they think they have. And when we start with questions, rather than diving in with lectures or information, it really helps to keep those lines of communication open with our kids, which will serve us across the parenting spectrum, right? The more that we are able to keep those lines of communication open, the more likely they are to ask us questions. And if we are willing and able to provide them with as many answers as we can, and we won't always know all the answers, but as many answers as we can, that will help build trust. And the two of the best tools for parenting a tween or teen are communication and trust. And by that, I mean for them to trust us, right? All right, with L, this is so difficult in this day and age, but we need to limit media exposure. Now, depending on the age of your child, they may or may not have access to a lot of media on their own. I'm just going to pause for one moment and say, if you're hearing a weird noise in my background, my dog is snoring behind me, and I'm very sorry about that. You may not hear it, but if you do, it's the dog. Okay, so limiting media exposure. We want to make sure that we are keeping it as age appropriate as we can, right? And the news, for the most part, is not little kid friendly. And one might even question whether it's adult friendly. I often feel like it isn't. But we want to make sure that we're getting our news from reputable sources, that we are waiting to gather information, again, from those reputable places, rather than making assumptions, guesses, spreading rumors, etc. And that we are limiting our exposure to traumatic events, whether that's, the robbery of a cell phone or something else. The more we read, the more we sort of obsess or ruminate about it, really the unhealthier that is for our brain. And we live in a 24/7 news cycle, which was not the case when most of us were growing up. It certainly wasn't the case when our parents were growing up. And our kids are being indoctrinated into this in a way that we don't really know the full impact. So if you've got, teens or tweens who are on social media, maybe helping them, set the settings or make decisions around social media that limits their exposure to ongoing, stressful or traumatic events. All right. The K is to know and share the facts. And this really ties in with that media piece, which is we want to provide our kids with factual information. And I know that sometimes truly factual information is difficult to come by. And it's difficult to come by for a number of different reasons. One, I already mentioned, and it's that constant news cycle. And there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation on the internet. This is probably not news to anyone. There are a lot of people on the internet with ulterior motives for sharing things that are not accurate. So we want to be careful about that. And then another reason we may not have a lot of information is if there's an ongoing investigation into something, the police department and the prosecutor's office or whichever law enforcement agencies are involved will often be very limited in the amount of information that they will share because they don't want to compromise the investigation. They will also occasionally, depending on the case, share misinformation because that will help them in the course of the investigation identify the true culprits. And so, we have to be really careful about what we are digesting. And so keeping things as factually accurate as we can is really important. And then providing facts to our kids. They need to know the facts, and they also need to hear us acknowledge what we don't know. I love to joke with my kids that I know everything. I think my 6-year-old sometimes still believes me. My 14-year-old, that ship has sailed, and she knows that I don't. And it's a joke between us. But there's some reality. They do need to know that we don't know everything, but that's okay, that we can still make decisions without all the information. All right, so that was talk. Now we move on to the scared part of the acronym. And S stands for see the good. So it's really important that we remind our kids when we're dealing with traumatic events that the overwhelming majority of people are good, decent, and mean well most of the time, right? And it's important for them to remember that there are helpers. And one of my favorite quotes, and some of you may have heard this, comes from Fred Rogers, who said, when I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. An event like this is a perfect example. So you heard Allie say at the beginning that Pacific Northwest Parent Ed was founded by and is run by exclusively by volunteers. Who work hard to get information out to the public on a variety of parenting topics, including this one. Those are helpers, right? That people are eager to help. And when we stop and look around, we can see them everywhere. And we need to remind our kids of that there are people who will help. As we're doing that, we also, whether we're a helper or not, we need to care for ourselves. The old adage that we, need to put our own oxygen mask on first before we can assist our child is completely true in the case of parenting. And when there are scary or traumatic events going on around us, and we're going to talk about the brain a little bit, we need to care for ourselves, because if we don't care for ourselves in our own emotional state, we cannot help our children. So we need to model regulating our emotions. We need to model coping with anxiety, and we need to model good self-care. All right. We need to acknowledge the why. That's the A in the scared. Children will likely have questions about why people do bad things. we won't always know the specific reasons, but we can help them understand that sometimes people make egregious choices in response to big emotions, in response to their own trauma, in response to their life circumstances. And that doesn't excuse the behavior, but it can help us understand the why. And in doing that, we need to remind our children, which is a healthy thing to remind them of anyway, that there are no bad emotions, right? There are no bad emotions. They might not feel good, but all emotions have a place. But bad emotions, bad experiences, bad circumstances don't justify bad behavior. With that being said, we also need to be very careful in talking to our children to avoid inadvertently making statements that demonstrate we have sort of an unconscious bias or racism, or we just want to be really careful about our wording in acknowledging the why. All right. The R is reassure. This is tough. This can sometimes be tough if you yourself are like, I don't know if my child is safe. Or if you are one of the parents whose child has been victimized and you're like, I can't reassure them because they weren't safe. We still need to find a way into reassurance. And what that can look like is validating and normalizing their feelings, not mocking them, not shaming them, not telling them to get over it, not telling them, you're fine, don't worry about it. We want to focus in the reassurance part of this on really connecting with them and listening to them, helping them name the emotion in order to tame the emotion, as Dr. Dan Siegel would say, and reassuring them that those helping people are doing everything they can to keep them safe. We want to empathize with them and emotion coach. So again, we want to make sure that we are really bringing empathy to that situation and not sort of shutting them down because we don't know how to manage ourselves. And we want to be an emotion coach, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, what that really means and what that looks like. And then finally, the D of talk scared is don't parent alone. You all have already figured that out because you're here today. You're here to get, information and support. I am a big fan of information and support. I am a believer that we were never meant to parent alone, that we need each other, that we need support. We need a village. We need to work with each other. And sometimes we need professionals. So if you are in a space related to this incident or series of incidents or anything else, don't do it by yourself. Reach out to me, reach out to someone else that you can get professional help from. There's lots of support out there for parents, and isolating ourselves isn't helping. Okay, let me just check our time. All right. So next, I want to talk about some things for keeping kids safer. And, when you are in a space where some crimes have occurred at the hands of strangers, it is really easy and really tempting to use fear to educate our kids, to tell them that strangers are dangerous, that the world is a dangerous place, that there's nowhere that they're safe, and to really use fear as our primary messaging system. And what we know is that that's not a great way to educate kids for a number of reasons. One, it doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. Kids don't think about or respond to fear in the same way that adults do. And so one of two things will happen. One, they will become so excessively fearful that will ramp up their anxiety and contribute to mental health challenges. Or two, they will discount everything we say. Because if we're leading from a fear place, they will be like, well, nothing happened to me today. So therefore, the information you're sharing with me may not be accurate, which decreases the trust and makes our kids less safe. The other thing that it does is, even for those kids who are sort of willing to go out in the world and haven't been directly victimized, they're now walking around thinking that everybody's ready to hurt them. And that's just not accurate. So if there was one thing I could do today, it would be to have you walk away from this and sort of banish that phrase stranger danger from your vocabulary or from the phrases that you use. And I don't know what's happened to my voice, so bear with me. The other reason, so, I talk about this a lot when I teach child sexual abuse prevention, and that's not the focus of today's conversation, but just to give you a little bit more context, with strangers, the other reasons that it doesn't work, the phrase stranger danger, is because kids don't view strangers in the same way that we as adults do, right? If I walked up to any one of your children and I said, hi, my name is Christy. I know your mom, or I know your dad, or, I support kids. They would probably not view me as a stranger anymore. Now that's for younger kids. Obviously that changes as they become tweens and teens. But it's important to recognize that, especially in those younger years, they don't view it the same way. And even those tweens and teens don't view it the same way, especially when it comes to somebody online. All right, number 2, and I already mentioned this, but it's actually, it's not healthy or safe for kids to be afraid of all strangers. They might need help from a stranger. They might need support from somebody they don't know. And if they're afraid to ask anybody for that help, it leaves them in a more dangerous and vulnerable position. And the third reason that stranger danger doesn't work is when it comes to child sexual abuse prevention, what we know is that roughly 93% of all child sexual abuse happens at the hands of someone that is known to us or our child. It's not happening at the hands of strangers. Strangers are generally not the risk. But if we are putting on our blinders and we're teaching our kids to only worry about and look out for strangers, and we are only worried about strangers, then we may be missing where the true risk is. In addition to that, there's a lot of false information, a lot of misinformation and disinformation in popular culture and media about kidnappings. And about the prevalence of kidnappings and how fearful we need to be that our children will be snatched off the street. Now, I know, and I don't want to go into the details of what happened in Ballard because I am not involved in the investigation, but it is my understanding that there was a child who was taken into a car until they could unlock their cell phone. Again, that is like fifth-hand information that I have. And that would certainly, under the law, qualify as a kidnapping. That being said, kidnappings, like true kidnappings of that nature or any other, are extremely, extremely rare. So a large number of children go missing every year, about 800,000 in the United States. That's a lot. That's a shocking number. But the overwhelming majority of those are not stranger kidnappings. The overwhelming majority are kidnappings by a non-custodial parent, or they are runaways for whatever reason. So that, like, when you hear numbers like that, when you hear like 800,000 children go missing every year, that sets panic into the fear of any parent, because those statistics like that are not being qualified or explained. And in fact, the majority of those are really runaways. And then we've got non-custodial parent kidnappings. On average, in the United States, we have, and there's roughly 5 million K through 12 students in the US right now. Of those, about 115 on average are stranger kidnappings each year. And of those, about 90% plus come home within 24 hours, are returned safely. In fact, a very high number of those are kids who are in the backseat of the car and the car gets stolen. True stranger kidnappings where someone, snatches a child off the street and takes them, extremely, extremely rare. In fact, some research about this has said that a child is more likely to be struck by lightning, and that if you had Imagine you had a kid you didn't like very much and you wanted to put them on the corner and have them be kidnapped. It would take on average about 750,000 years for that to happen. I say all of that because I want to calm people's nerves a little bit and recognize that these incidents are rare. Even when we've seen it happen, right, in that incident that I described, it's still a very, very rare occurrence. And that allows us to reassure our kids and ourselves a bit. Here's how to talk to kids about safety rather than using the phrase stranger danger. We want to replace that phrase with the phrase tricky person. We want to teach them that a tricky person can be a stranger, a family member, or a friend. It can be someone that they know a lot, someone that they know a little, someone that they don't know at all. It can be someone of any gender and any age. And I don't have this on the slide, but it can be someone online or in person. And the guiding rule is that, or the thing that differentiates a tricky person is anyone who tries to trick you into breaking a safety rule or makes you feel uncomfortable. Okay, some savvy safety strategies. So when we talk about public safety and we talk about having our kids walk out and about in the world, what are some of the strategies that we want to give them? Even keeping in mind that, stranger kidnappings or issues with strangers are extremely, extremely rare. We want to give them some basic safety tools like don't approach a car that you don't know, or even a car that you do know, if you're not sure what the purpose of that is. We want to teach them to keep a distance from somebody that might be approaching them and makes them feel uncomfortable. But when it comes to situations like someone approaching a child, and I'm going to use the word child because that's really anyone under the age of 18, frankly, anyone under the age of 25. When someone approaches a child and demands property, and actually this is true for adults too, we want to teach our kids to turn over the property, give it to them. Right? If it's a cell phone, if it's jewelry, if it's your backpack, if it's your wallet, if it's your credit card, if it's your wedding ring, turn it over. There is no item of property that is worth your life or your child's life. So that needs to be the number one rule. Give them what they want. Okay. The only time we ever want to get into a fight with anybody is if they are trying to get you or your child to go to another location, right? To get into a car, to go somewhere with them. At that point, then fighting back is appropriate. Now, I say all of this, and I have vetted this with a lieutenant in a local police department. But I know there will also be a conversation with, or that there may be a conversation with Seattle Police around the events in Ballard. And if they tell you something different, then please listen to them. Make sure that your child knows how to unlock your phone, that they know the passcode, that it's not just their face that unlocks it, right? But that they also know a numerical code to unlock the phone so that if someone else is asking them to unlock it, they can do that. They also need to know the Apple ID, right? It's because if that is going to be the piece of information that keeps this criminal from hanging around longer, then by all means, we want to make sure our kids have that information and can turn it over readily. We also need to teach them not to be buried in their phone. So we all know teens who are addicted to these devices. And frankly, we all know adults who are. You may be one of them. It is really easy to walk around, wherever you're going and be on your phone. It is also really dangerous. So we need to teach our kids that when they are walking around, whether it's in a group or individually, their phones are in their bags and that they are eyes up, ears open. So that also means don't walk with headphones in. I know a lot of people go like running and they like to have their earphones in. You are an adult, you get to make decisions as an adult, but the safest thing is to not have those in, and to be able to hear what's going on around you. And then the next piece of advice is to teach kids to walk in pairs or groups, right? As often as possible. And it's not always possible, but, so that they are with other individuals, and that will make them less of a target. Okay, I want to just check our time here. Allie, did you say I would chat for 35 or 40 minutes? Is that right?
Yep, Christy, that's right.
Okay, great. So I'll take 5 more minutes and then we'll turn this over for some
Okay,
questions.
yeah, this is great because some of the questions that we already have received, you're touching on one of the top 5 questions that we received. So I think this is an important piece because otherwise it's just going to come up in the Q&A too.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so then I know, and one of the questions I know that has come up that I don't have on this slide is whether or not we should be giving our children some form of protective device. And by that, I mean a weapon of some kind, bear spray, mace, or a personal alarm. And the answer to those will be a little bit different. And again, this is something I encourage you to communicate with law enforcement about. But here's my understanding of what the general recommendation is. 1, no, your child does not need a weapon. They don't need a knife. They don't need a gun. They don't need anything of that nature. Please. 2, mace or bear spray is not something that we should be handing to our young people, tweens and teens. 1, it's not allowed in the schools. It's considered a weapon. And 2, they may not know how to use it or have it handy. It's often not a terribly effective tool for them to be using. However, my understanding is that the recommendation that law enforcement would make when it comes to personal little alarms is different. And I don't have one with me, but there are little alarms that you can get to attach to your keychain. My daughter actually has one on hers. And you pull it apart and it sets off an alarm. That can be valuable. There is also an app that you can get on your phone called Noon Light. And I think Kelly from Pacific Northwest Parent Ed was going to drop that into the chat. But that's an app on your phone that you open it up if you are in danger, and it can identify for law enforcement where you are. So those might, and I'm sure there are many other tools out there, but those are just 2 that you might look into. So these, when we talk about talking with our kids, these are conversations that we need to be having with them. All right, I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit, but I want to, I often talk with parents about how the brain works, and I want to make sure that everybody knows that we have these things in our brains called mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are, the research into these is pretty recent, in the last 10 to 15 years. And these are neurons in our brain that invite us into the emotional state of the person that we are interacting with. Why am I sharing this in a safety talk? Because you as parents may be at a heightened level of anxiety and stress. And if you are unable to sort of manage your own level of anxiety and stress, what you will be doing is inviting your child into that stress. What we want to do instead is invite our child into our calm rather than joining their chaos. And this is true whether you're arguing with them about doing their homework, whether they want to go out with friends and you're upset about it, or when we're talking about safety. We need to make sure that we are inviting them into calmness and that we're having conversations about safety and the Talk Scared framework when we are in a place of calm. Okay. I just want to figure out what the best, I always have more information than I can share with anybody in any given moment. I mentioned that I was going to tell you what the 5 steps of emotion coaching are, because that's the E in the Talk Scared framework. So these steps were designed or developed by Dr. John Gottman. And this is really how we help kids, tweens, teens work through issues. So, and how we can sort of help ourselves as well. So the first is by getting really aware, digging into what are the feelings that are happening. Then we want to work to connect with our kids. So if you have a child who's feeling anxious about this, scared about this, afraid to walk anywhere, afraid to leave the home, we want to make sure that we're really investing a lot of time and energy into that connection piece. And then the 2 wings of it, being aware of what's going on for them and listening to them, right? Instead of lecturing. We want to listen as much as possible. We then want to identify what the emotion is. Oops, sorry about that. What the emotion is that they are feeling before we look to solve anything, right? So those 4 steps may take much longer than the solution piece, because once we've worked through those 4 pieces, the solutions become a lot easier. Okay. And I know I'm sort of moving quickly through some of these. The last thing that I would like to recommend in a time of stress is that you both teach self-regulation and self-care skills, and that you model it, right? So that's the number one most important thing. You model these for your kids. You're going to teach self-regulation skills when you are calm, when your child is calm. They cannot learn to take deep breaths when they are already upset, right? We hear a lot of parents say, okay, take a deep breath, take a deep breath, take a deep breath, when our kids are like panicking or in the throes of anxiety or having a temper tantrum. And what we really need to be doing is giving them those skills and teaching those skills when they're calm, so that they have the neural pathways to access when they're upset. We need to connect with them, right? Connection is, as I've already mentioned, key and in so many different ways. And then we can look at the dose chemicals, making sure that both you and your kids are getting those dose chemicals every day. What do I mean by that? Dose stands for dopamine, which is released when we're well rested, when we listen to music, when we meditate, when we spend time in the sun, which is seeming a little fewer and farther between here in the Pacific Northwest, when we exercise, and when we feel like we've accomplished something. O stands for oxytocin, which is released when we connect with others. See the bullet point above. It is also released when we tell someone how much we care, when we meditate, when we cuddle or hug, and when we pet a dog, or probably a cat as well. So looking for ways to draw one another closer. Serotonin is the S. That is released when we actively practice gratitude and when we pay attention to our gut health. So in times like this, where if you are feeling a heightened level of fear, looking for ways to practice gratitude can be incredibly important. And then finally, E, endorphins. Those happen when we move our bodies, and really our kids don't move enough, most of them or many of them. So we need to get them moving and recognize that movement will help calm down the anxious feelings. We can also eat chocolate, spicy foods, meditate, and laugh, which I really like all of those. So, all right, I'm going to pause there. As I said, I feel like I always have more content and information that I would love to share with everyone, but I know there are tons and tons of questions. So I will pull my slides back up if they are needed or helpful to answer specific questions. But I want to make sure that I'm giving each of you, or giving everyone who's present time to ask as many questions as we can possibly get through.
Thank you so much, Christy. This is really helpful information, and you have already answered a lot of the questions that came in. We collected questions, as you know, as part of the registration process, and then the Q&A is also open. But some of the questions that we're hearing over and over again kind of intertwine with what you have already said, but a few more points on some specific issues could be helpful. Some parents were wondering, and I know I have this question myself as well with my own kids, is just how to teach our kids to just be, we keep saying, be really aware of your surroundings. I mean, I had it on one of the talk scared things, keep your head up, ear pods out, and, be aware of what you're doing. Stop being buried in your phone. But in general, when you're just talking to your kids, and I mean, I guess it could be anybody from like a elementary school age kid. I know you're going to have a different conversation with them than a teen, but how, without scaring them that they should always be on a swivel, and, how do you encourage them to be aware of their surroundings, but without scaring them as well? So,
yeah, it's such a good question. And I have to say, I am dealing with this with my own children. We had the great fortune to do some traveling this summer, where we were doing a lot of walking. And I felt like I was constantly saying to my kids, so my older daughter's 14, my younger daughter is 6. They're in very different developmental ages and stages, but I felt like for both of them, I was constantly saying, move to the right, like pay attention to where people are. And they weren't on their phones, but they were just, doing this. and with good reason, like we were in a new place, but that really decreased their awareness of who was around them, who was coming at them. And it can be really frustrating as a parent because you're like, pay attention. So some suggestions for that are when we are out and about with them, modeling in a healthy way, like how we pay attention, right? So, just demonstrating, we can even sort of narrate sometimes what we're doing, so if they don't really know what it means to pay attention, we can say things like, hey, as we're headed to downtown Seattle today, or to downtown, wherever you're from, I'm going to show you how I kind of look around and pay attention. And what we can do to make sure that we're not focusing too much on fear is to bring like joyful moments into that too, right? So we can say like, I just noticed that mom and that little girl like hugging each other. And over there, oh, look at that amazing coat that woman is wearing, and, man, that guy looks like he really knows what's going on. He's got it all together. And I'm also noticing that there's someone up here who looks like they might be drunk and, not able to sort of stand up straight. And so we can sort of narrate what we're seeing and what we're noticing so that it is teaching our kids in both safety ways and frankly, in not missing out on life ways to look around and notice what's happening around them. And then we can practice that as they get older by saying, hey, tell me what you just noticed. Like, tell me 5 things that you just saw as we were walking together, to just get them in the habit of kind of looking up and looking around them. Hey, what color was the car that just went by us? Do you know? And odds are they don't, but you can teach them to pay attention to some of those details by making it kind of fun. And, you could make a contest out of it. You could make a fun game out of it. Or you can just model that awareness.
Great. That's helpful. I think a lot of our kids are, starting to move out on their own, and transportation wise, and other parents are even asking questions about walking and busing. So what is a good age for kids to start learning those skills of walking and busing alone? So someone says, what age can they walk through the neighborhood without an adult, either solo or with a group of friends? How does this extend to taking public transportation? And also keeping in mind, not every kid has a phone or a smartwatch. So it's different kind of how some parents perceive those two different kids.
Yeah. Well, and I hope not every every kid has a smartphone. They don't need them. We think they're safety devices. They are not. So that is the first thing that we need to all sort of come to grips with, is the idea that a phone will keep a child safe is absolutely patently untrue. And in fact, a phone is more likely to make a child unsafe than it is to make them safe, particularly if they have access to the internet on the phone, because we have to think about where safety is coming from, right? Or where danger is coming from. That's a conversation for a whole nother time. But I hear a lot of parents saying, well, I'm giving my child a phone so that they can call me if they need me. And the reality is that we're actually introducing a whole nother host of issues that don't necessarily make that child safer, and may have the exact opposite impact. In terms of answering when a child is old enough to go somewhere. So I live in the state of Washington. There may be people attending this today who are not based in the same state. So I want to offer this with a caveat that you need to know the law in your own state. And I am not a US lawyer, I'm a Washington lawyer. But there is no legal age in Washington at which a child is deemed old enough to stay by themselves at home, to walk by themselves, wherever they're going. It's really kind of decided on a case-by-case basis, given the full circumstances. You know your child best. However, I will say that I think most of us in the modern day and age are far more paranoid than we need to be. Now, I recognize that I'm saying that on the heels of some awful events happening, but I still want to go back to the, recognizing that overall, violent crime is down. Overall, kids are safe. And I am reminded there's a phenomenal woman. Some of you may have heard of her. She actually spoke in the Safe Parenting Summit that I hosted in February of this year. for any of you who attended, and her name is Lenore Skenazy. She wrote a book called Free Range Kids, and she currently runs a nonprofit organization called Let Grow. If you are not subscribed to her newsletter, I highly, highly recommend it, particularly if you run on the anxious side of things when it comes to parenting. She puts things in such beautiful perspective, and one of her co-board members is a man by the name of Dr. Peter Gray, who teaches at Boston University or Boston College, I can't remember. And Dr. Gray has spoken on my podcast, and he talks about the need for children to play without parents overseeing and supervising everything. So it's the answer to what age is going to depend on, what kind of a street you live on. And for example, if you live in Ballard, is your child car safe, right? Cars will actually pose the biggest danger to kids, far more than strangers or other humans will. Are they car savvy? Do they know where to look out for cars backing out of a driveway, or, how to cross the street safely? Those would be questions I would want to know. And I mean, cars are an issue anywhere. Are they out riding their bikes, right? I live in suburbia where on a dead end street where my kid at age 6 has free range to go do whatever she wants on her bike. I let her play outside without adult supervision. And I'm very comfortable doing that. Because I know that it's safe. That honestly, the thing I worry about most, again, is the cars. Lenore Skenazy ended up writing her book and founding her organization because she was labeled at one point America's worst mom, because she let her, I can't remember if her son was 8 or 9, but he rode the subway in New York City by himself. He knew how to do it. He had, been on the subway many times with his parents and knew how to do it and was just fine. So when it comes to public transportation, I don't know that I would put my child on the city bus, having never ridden it with them, but I would ride it with them, make sure they know how to do it. Do they know where to get on? Do they know how to pay or show their student ID? Do they know how to get off, and where to get off? Are they, again, aware, right? And not buried in their phone the entire time they're on the bus with their earphones in? Do they know what to do if there's a problem? Do they know how to go tell the bus driver that there's an issue? Do they know to just get off the bus if they feel uncomfortable? Or pretend that they're going to get off the bus, depending on the circumstances. So I would make sure that there are lots of safety conversations of that nature. And then I would ride that bus with them, make sure it's a route that you generally feel is, a safe one. There are some routes I might not have my child ride, but generally, in the Ballard area and sort of the neighboring areas, I think, children at a much younger age than we think can do that pretty safely. I'm not going to give you a number though, because it depends on your child and their sort of ability to manage themselves. Is that helpful, or just leave more confusion?
No, I think it's helpful for me, for sure. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of questions just about how, and you touched on several of them, I was already crossing them off, just about how youth should react in certain moments. And so I just made note of some of the ones that maybe weren't touched on that one slide that you had when you were talking about turnover property, don't switch locations, know your passcode or ID, all those. A couple of the other ones that came up was, the first one was just specific verbiage. Other people have heard, don't yell, don't just start yelling, because everybody hears teens yelling and playing around or whatever. Are there specific words we should have our kids yell? Help, fire, anything like that? Or what do you recommend if there's verbiage around that?
Yeah. So, and actually I want to add something about turning over property. So it's also not a bad idea to have a child, or you as an adult, toss the property to the person asking for it. So that you're not like in a hand-to-hand exchange. And, you can even slide the phone across the sidewalk if that's what you need to do, and try to move away, right? As you're doing that. In terms of verbiage, I would tend to agree. And again, I want to be really clear that I am not law enforcement. And so I would want you to, verify this with the local police who are investigating this particular set of circumstances. But yes, the word help is much more likely to get a response in many cases than just yelling. I don't know that I would yell fire for a number of reasons, but I think help, it would probably be my go-to word that I would teach kids to use. And then to create as much distance between themselves and the perpetrator as they can.
Okay, great. That's helpful. And then one of the other ones that was mentioned, if a youth is walking or whatever, and they see a car kind of slow down or kind of making eyes at them, maybe even going as far as winking or waving or something like that, what's the best response? Do they turn around? Do they go on a porch? Are they trying to grab a license plate? Are they not making eye contact, so not to provoke them? Like, but what then? If they're kind of feeling like there's a tricky person,
Yes. So first of all, I always teach parents to trust their gut and to teach kids to trust their gut. And we don't do this very well in our culture. We, especially as adults, we've done a really good job, or I should say our parents did a really good job of teaching us not to trust our guts. And in fact, and this is true to some degree for everyone, but it is absolutely true for women and girls, right? We're taught not to make a scene. Don't make a scene. If you're in the elevator and someone gets on that you feel uncomfortable about, you don't want to make anybody feel bad. So just stay in the elevator. That's what we have learned to do. I would like us to all start counteracting that instinct and listening to our gut. So get off the elevator. If you are, if you're walking down the street and somebody in a car gives you the uh-oh feeling, makes your gut, I would say, do what is going to make you feel safe. So I would not acknowledge them. I wouldn't acknowledge the individuals in the car. I would turn around and go the other direction. I would look at, is there a home that you can walk up to and ask for help where it looks like somebody's there, a business that you can walk into? If not, can you get on the phone with a parent? Can you call the police, right? You can call the police. You can teach your children. If they have an uncomfortable feeling and somebody's following them, call the police, right? It is okay to call 911. And we tend to say, well, don't call unless it's a real emergency. But if you call the police and say, I'm 14 years old, and somebody's following me in their car and it's making me really uncomfortable and I don't know what to do, the police will respond. They will help. And so that would be another thing. So, getting to a brightly lit area, getting to an area where there are lots of people, going up to a house, going into a business, turning and going the other direction, calling 911, or any and all of those would be things that I think would increase the likelihood of safety.
Thank you. I know, Christy, I so appreciate your willingness to stay on for a couple more questions. Are you still in that space right now?
Yep.
Okay.
Happy to do it.
For anybody else that needs to drop off, I know we said at 1 p.m. this was a drop off. This will be recorded, including the Q&A, so you'll be able to click through, and we'll send that link in an email, as well as the resources that Christy has mentioned. Right when you log off, there's going to be like a survey. Please fill it out. It just helps us know so much if this is helpful, what other things to do. It also will trigger if you want to have more events like this with the Seattle Police Department and things like that, so we can share that information with them. And I know we will never, even as we stay on a few more minutes, be able to get to all the questions, but I've been working with Christy for years personally, and on her website and her academy, which if you fill out the survey, you can win a free membership too. She has tons of resources on other questions, and you'll have her direct contact info on that. So there's lots of other supports in addition to reaching out to Seattle Police Department and council members and things like that. So everyone stay safe, stay on if you'd like to keep working through some more questions, but I wanted to be respectful of people's time.
Yeah.
Speaking of driving and things like that, Christy, one person brought up, and I just heard about this happening in West Seattle quite a bit, is if your teen or you is in a situation where you get into a fender bender,
Mhm.
what is the safest thing to do in that situation? Do you get out of the car? Do you stay in the car and call 911 from there, or what? Because that has been kind of a tricky situation where some of those people are being targeted.
Yes. So it's a really great question, and I will answer it, but I also want to give the caveat that this would be a really appropriate question to ask police
Okay.
about, because again, I'm not a law enforcement officer. I've never, never trained as a law enforcement officer. But given what I know based on my work with police, the recommendation would be, I mean, obviously you're legally obligated to stop the car when there's a fender bender, right? And so what I would do, and it depends a little bit on if you're the car in the front or if you're the car in the back, right? Because the car in the front can kind of dictate where you stop. And so what I would do is, ideally, if possible, put on your hazards and get to a brightly lit public area, a parking lot, and obviously this isn't the case of a fender bender. If there's a major collision, that's a different scenario. And then you should be calling the police anyway. But getting to a brightly lit parking lot or in front of a business or somewhere where other people are. And then what I would frankly recommend, and yes, this would mean that a police report gets filed, and yes, it may mean that a ticket is issued, and yes, it may mean that your insurance rates go up, but you could have your kid call 911 and say, I've just been in this fender bender. Here's the license plate of the car that's involved. And here's the location where I am. And so that they know, and, I don't know that a police response is necessary, but I want you to have that information, or I'd like to stay on the phone with you while I talk to the person, so that you can say, hey, I'm on the phone with the police. Now, again, other people, people involved in those may prefer that you would not call the police, but for the safety of a teen, that would probably be my advice. Yeah. Again, I would prefer that you're able to pull into a really brightly lit area. You can, again, I'd recommend talking with the police about this. You can stay in the car, write down your information and pass it through the window. That might be another option. But I think that is a question well posed to law enforcement.
Right. Okay.
Those are the things I would tell my own kid.
Yeah.
At this point. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's probably good advice for all of us. And this may be another one that I mean, I'm sure it is one that the police department could help facilitate, but I mean, there's just a lot of parents that want to take action, they want to do something. They want to advocate for, youth safety. They want to set up block watches or figure out a neighborhood safety? Like, do you have any recommendations on places to start? Is it just contacting their local Congress people council members and
yeah,
or
yes. So there's a number of different ways to approach this. And, we're in a really difficult place culturally with the tension between public safety and law enforcement, and, recognizing some of the very inherent, I don't want to say inherent, that's not the right word, but some of the many issues that we have seen with police and law enforcement, and yet recognizing that we also have a crime rate that needs to be addressed. And there's some real tensions there. And I don't know the answers to those, but I think for those people who want to get involved, starting with the mayor's office, your the city council, even the police department, and then, also like making sure that there are candidates that are supporting what you want them to support in terms of like the balance between those things, right? and working to get the vote out about stuff. So I don't have I can't say go to this organization and here's where you want to start.
Yeah.
But I would say, working with all of those organizations and trying to find a way to improve it so that it's working for our whole community. Now, as a prosecutor, right, I know the issues that are in law enforcement.
Mhm.
And I
Right.
know that there are times when we need them. And so there's a real tension there. So I wish I had a perfect answer for people, but I would say the mayor, city council, police department would be a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. The next question was on self-defense or martial arts. And do you recommend having any exposure to that? And the person even said, not necessarily to fight, but just training on how to carry yourself and exude confidence so that maybe you would be less likely to be a target.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of martial arts and self-defense for kids. Not so that they can fight back and keep their cell phone. My advice, and I think the police department's advice would still be give the cell phone away, give it to them. But yeah, like martial arts and self-defense, especially if you find a really supportive, facility for that with a really supportive instructor, can be phenomenal for kids in terms of physical activity. Remember, we talked about the dose chemicals, like can help with that. Can be really great for self-control, regulation, body control, confidence. I was in martial arts in high school, and I've never done anything with it, but I think it really did help with all of those sorts of things. So yeah, if there's time in your child's schedule without over scheduling them, I'm a big fan, but not for the purpose of becoming, Cobra Kai or whatever, and being able to fight back.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we just have one last main question here. I know you talked about this a little bit in the talk scared, but about as adults, and it was a good reminder for me of not sharing information that you don't know as a fact with your kids. But another parent even brought up, how do you have when you're talking to your kids about these things, how do you encourage them to verify information with their peers and not just add on to the gossip and the maybe misinformation that could cause
Yeah,
other problems, socially, and scare other kids or whatever.
for sure. Well, okay, I'm going to have a couple of different answers to that. And the first one is, the longer you can keep your child off social media, the better. It is not designed for the human brain. It's definitely not designed for the teenage brain. And it's the longer you can keep them off it, the better. Second answer to that is it's going to come down a lot to the way you are parenting. So the way that you're talking about things, if they hear you gossiping and adding fuel to the fire, that's how they're going to learn to do it, right? Because the number one way that children learn is by modeling. It's not by what we tell them, it's by what they see us do. So if you are on with all your other parent friends going, oh my goodness, and all these like conversations, it's really tough to then turn around and say, but I don't want you to gossip and I don't want you to add anything that you don't know is true. We have to be really careful about our own modeling. And then we have to be really conscientious and thoughtful about how we're conveying our values around that and how we're talking about family values, right? At the dinner table, in the car, how are we digging into some of those issues? And there are great resources out there. Like there's a number of different, like question cards, that are commercially made that you can have at your dinner table. 52 questions is one brand. That's not the brand. Suddenly can't think of the brand, but
yeah,
if you look up, 52 social situations or something on Amazon, Mind Brain Learning might be the brand. They've got some great ways to dig into values. Table Topics has great boxes of questions. And so, it's really about the conversations that we're having with our children on a regular, consistent basis. Again, not in a lectury way. And I had some slides that I could share about like how to talk to teens and how not to talk to teens, but I'll give you the Cliff Notes. don't lecture them. They will shut down. And so if you're like, I don't want you to do this, it's going in one ear and out the other. We have to engage in really thoughtful, heartful conversations that are based in curiosity, and sort of find out, like, why do people do that? Why do you know, what would cause you to do that? Or if you find out they did it, what were you thinking when you did that, and why? And from a place of non-judgment. And that's how we're going to engage them in thinking about their own behavior and making changes to their behavior, not by setting down hard and fast rules and lecturing them. They will shut us out.
Yeah. I feel that. I've had that happen. There.
I mean, let's be honest, we know more than they do, and we would really like them to listen to us. Right. We are wise and they are not, in many ways. And they have their own wisdom, actually.
Sure.
And it is not to be discounted. But when we go, guns ablazing with, I know everything, and let me tell you the way this is and how to do it, and it just doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't work like with a partnership or with anybody.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Christy, and thanks for everybody that was able to attend. We'll get the information out to everybody so they can rewatch or share it with, make sure that, the people who were unavailable still have that content. So, and hopefully everybody will be safe and feel a little more equipped to use these skills throughout life.
Yeah. Thank you again to Pacific Northwest Parent Ed for being one of the helpers, right, that are there to support the community and parents in general. I also think of myself as a helper. And so if people do need additional support, remember the D in Talk Scared, which is don't parent alone. I offer lots of support, and there are others out there who do as well. So we've got you.
Yeah, thanks. I feel like everybody that's even listening is the type of person that's a helper, or they wouldn't spend an hour of their day focusing on this. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye.